Hi everyone, today we will be learning how to embroider this adorable little unicorn. This comes with a bunch of different designs including florals, sunglasses, and a bunch of other accessories to make this unicorn especially cute for any little one in your life. This is based off of a template I sell on my Etsy, so all of the information will be linked down below. Let's get started. Some materials you're going to need is one of my digital templates printed out on Sulky Stick and Stitch. This is a water-soluble fabric-like material. You'll notice here that there is a sticky adhesive that applies to your garment and then it washes away with water. You're also going to need some yarn. I prefer a weight 4 for this, but I'll have all of mine linked down below. Optional is one of these air or water-soluble erasable pens. I find them helpful. And my favorite needles, these are sharp, large eye embroidery needles. You're also going to need some scissors, and I do find a ruler helps, but if you don't have one of these laying around or a ruler, you can simply count these stitches, and I'll show you how to do that later. Optional as well is some of these pearls. I like to dot my florals with these, and some DMC thread if you need or you want to do these pearls. We're going to get started by placing our sticker on our garment. I have this handy little tool here that I will have linked below, but a ruler or even just eyeballing it or counting the kind of rows on your sweater will work in this case. I'm just going to mark off the center here with either a water-soluble or air-soluble marker, and if the ink isn't coming out, you can shake these to kind of get the ink to come to the tip. Now, I don't have it here, but all of my patterns do come with a center line in the middle just so you can kind of put these on your garment a little easier, but I'm just going to kind of eyeball mine to the horn here because I don't have it. I like to kind of just place my sticker down and kind of just get a general layout of the top and bottom of my sweater as well as the sides, just to make sure that it's nicely aligned. I don't want this to be any closer than 1 inch away from all of the kind of outside seams. Once I'm happy with this, I'm going to peel it off and place it on my sweater. And if I'm happy with the placement, I'm going to firmly place my sticker down just so it doesn't move. We're going to start by learning chain stitch. Note that I have a little bit of a tail here on my needle so that it doesn't pop off. I have about 6 feet of yarn here to work with, and that's about 2 arms lengths worth. I find this works best for the ears and it's easiest to work with when pulling things through. I'm going to start by going through both lines of these ears. Note that I'm going to go in the same direction for both sides just so it looks nice and cohesive. Starting on this left ear here, I'm going to do the outer ear, and I'm going to come up from the back of the denim jacket, coming all the way to the front. So I'm going to poke my needle through on the bottom of the ear and pull it all the way through. I'm going to leave about 6 inches of tail on the back here, just so we can weave in the ends later. I didn't leave enough here and I suffered for it later, so do better than me. To do the chain stitch, we're going to take our needle down through the same hole we just created and then come up on the line about 1/4 inch away. Note that my yarn is behind my needle so that when I pull through, I'm in this loop. I'm also holding the yarn on the back side so that it doesn't pop through the front. Once we get our nice little loop here, we're going to do that same exact process going down through the same hole we just created and then coming up on the line about 1/4 inch away. We're going to do this process all the way around the ears, so make sure you're really comfortable with it. I'll show you a few more times until you get the hang of it, but feel free to rewind and rewatch this again because we will be doing this for the majority of items on our unicorn. So again, coming up, make sure that yarn is behind so that when you pull through, you're in a nice little loop. Try not to over tighten this as you could create puckering on your garment, so once you feel a bit of resistance, stop. Do that until you get to the tip of the ear. Once you chain stitch to the top of the ear, you're going to poke your needle down through the garment just to create a sharper point. So I'm going to poke it down through that same hole we just created just to kind of anchor this piece of chain stitch. You're going to pull that all the way through until you feel resistance, and if it kind of gets a little wonky like mine did here, you can take the eye of your needle and just kind of finagle it until it's nice and even. And then I'm going to pull that a little tighter on the back. Next, to start on the other side of the ear, we're going to poke our needle back up through this center piece here. So aim for the inside of your last chain stitch, but try to avoid that little stitch down marker, as then you could pull it through to the front if you do. So pull that through, making sure you're right on the denim inside that last chain stitch. Pull that all the way through, making sure it's nice and tight. I'm just going to flip you around because I like to work away from me. I find it's easier to work with, and I'm just going to do that chain stitch all the way to the end of the ear. You'll start to notice that your yarn may start to unravel a little bit. If that happens, you can just twist the needle in the direction the yarn is flowing just to get it back to that nice cohesive yarn look. This just happens because yarn is not meant for embroidery, so I kind of have to do this every few inches just to make it nice and tight again. Once I'm satisfied, I can continue my chain stitch until I get to the end of the ear. I'm going to bring you in close just so you can see where I'm poking the needle through. Note that my needle is going through that last chain stitch as well, just so again it looks very cohesive and you won't see any gapping in your chain stitch. stitch. If it is hard to pull through this denim, you can kind of wiggle it or place the denim more horizontally to the needle, and that seems to help. Once you get to the end, you're just going to poke your needle down through just like you did at the top, but in this case we're finishing off the ear, so I'm going to show you how to weave in the ends. So I'm just going to go down through that same hole we just created, and I'm going to pull that through the other side, pulling it nice and tight. Again, I have a little bit of a disfigurement here, so I'm just going to kind of correct that with the eye of my needle just so it looks nice and good. And there you have it. Let's flip this garment over and learn how to weave in the ends. On the back of your garment, you're going to take your needle and you're going to weave in the ends all the way up to the top. I like to do about 1 inch or 2 of this. So you're just going to take the needle and push it through those kind of back stitches on the back of your garment, weaving it all the way up. Again, I like to do about 1 inch or 2 of this, and I find this is the most helpful to prevent it from unraveling. But if you don't have as much space, 1 inch is perfectly plenty to do it. So on this left piece, I only had about 1 inch to work with, but it will not unravel, I promise you. I've had blankets like this for years now, and they have not unraveled a bit. So this is the most secure method I found for weaving in my ends or knotting the ends. So I always prefer to do this when I can, but if you can't, a triple knot works just as well. And there you have it. You'll repeat this process on the inner ears as well as the other side of the ears and the eyes as well. Next, we're going to learn how to stitch the horn, and we're going to do the same chain stitch technique we did on the ear, but we're going to go in this nice little pattern. So I have a little photo off to the right of the exact pattern we're going to go in for this, along with when we will stitch it down. So we're going to start by going in this direction, and every time we stop or you have an X on your pattern, we're going to stitch down the materials, the yarn, and then we're going to restart on the next section. So this first one, number 1, we're going to come up and stitch it down, and then come up and stitch it down. So number 2, come up and stitch it down, okay? So we're going to do that same process this entire time, starting with 1, the pink one, coming up, stitch it down at the top, coming down, and stitch it down where that X is. Continuing this process, coming up and stitching it down where every single X is on the right side. This will also be on the PDF if you've purchased the digital template so that you can look at it all the time, but I will keep it on here on screen as well so you can refer to it. We're going to go all the way down to the bottom. This will also help you if you want to do a rainbow horn, determining where you will want to place all the different colors of your horn. For this video, I will just be doing one color, so I have about 2 feet of yarn here to start on this top section, and we're going to come up right at where that pink one started, so it's kind of this second little line on the bottom, and we're going to pull that all the way through, again leaving about 6 inches of tail on the back that we will use to weave in or tie off later. Again, we're just going to do that same chain stitching technique, so go down and then push it up onto the line about 1/4 inch away, making sure that our yarn is behind our needle so that when we pull it through, we get this nice little loop. We're going to continue that process until we get all the way to the top where our first stitch down is. Now, if you didn't follow the ear tutorial, this will also help, but we're also just going to stitch above that line just to create a sharper point. You can stitch in the same hole as well. I just found this looked a little cuter to kind of create that sharp point at the top. Now this top section is a little tricky because it is very small, but we're going to do that same technique we did on the ear where we're going to come up in that last chain stitch we did, again trying to make sure we don't go in that little stitch down marker, otherwise you do risk pulling the yarn through all the way to the front. So notice I'm right in that little stitch marker right in the middle of that chain stitch, and I'm going to pull that through and continue my chain stitch all the way down until I get to that next little marker on my template here. When I get to the little stitch down place, or I meet another piece of yarn like I do here, I'm kind of just going to pull back that previous chain stitching and push my needle down underneath it just to kind of hide it. So I'm kind of aiming for that line but underneath the previous chain stitches. I'm going to pull that all the way through. If you have, again, any resistance, you can kind of wiggle the needle around as you see me doing here, and then pull that yarn through. That way it looks like it's one cohesive piece and you can't see where you stopped your chain stitch. Now on the back of the garment, these 2 pieces of yarn are a little bit away from each other, so I'm just going to do that weaving technique where I kind of go under a few of these stitches here until I meet another piece of yarn to tie it off with. This is called a whipped back stitch, and it does look really cute for candy canes and other things of that nature, but in this case it just kind of helps me navigate back to the original piece of yarn so that I can tie a triple knot. The reason we want to do this is if we don't, we could create little loops in our yarn on the back of the garment or the sweater or whatever we're working on, and since these are usually made for little kids, I don't like to do that because then little fingers could get caught in these, and not only could that hurt, but it could ruin your embroidery as well. So make sure you always weave in and then tie off your ends like you see me doing here. So we're just going to continue this little horn process all the way up until the top, following those same directions, stitching it off just like you did for that first little piece. Let me know if you have any questions down below because this definitely is a little tricky to get a hang of, but I hope this video helps. Once you finish doing all of your yarn on your horn, you're going to turn it over on the back and we can weave in all of these ends. Now the first one I did weave in just because it was so close together, but the rest of these I actually just leave hanging out until the end because you're going to use the previous piece of yarn to tie these off with. So I'm kind of just separating out pieces of yarn that are closest to each other. That way I have the least amount of weaving in to do. So once you have your pieces kind of coordinated where you can weave them in, you can weave in all those ends and tie off with a triple knot just like we did with the first piece. You may notice me here doing kind of a square knot technique where I go over with the left piece and then I go over with that same right piece. This just kind of creates a more stable knot, but a triple knot will work just as well. But just a little technique there in case you wanted some more secure knots, especially for these wearables that get done a lot. But there you have it. Your horn should look like this when you're done. Next, we're going to stitch this bow and we're going to do that same chain stitching technique, but I'm just going to show you kind of how to do this all with one piece. So I have about 6 feet of yarn here on my needle and I'm just going to come up around this bow on the left side and then stitch it down in the middle here. Once I get back to the middle, I'm just going to stitch that down, but don't take your needle off because we're just going to, again, use one continuous piece here. So I'm going to pull this through and then I'm going to push it back up on the right side of our bow so I can stitch that second side. So again, I'm just going to pull this all the way up, chain stitch until I get back to the center on the other side. And then once I get back to the center on the other side, I am again just going to stitch that down and place it in the middle. Then we can kind of do the center of our bow here, and I'm just going to do that by coming up on the middle of 2 of these chain stitches. I'm just going to do this one here because it's right where I'm at, and then I will again chain stitch around that center. Once I get to kind of any of the pieces of yarn, I do want to make sure I'm overlapping them just like we did at the beginning, just so we can't see any gapping in our chain stitch. It just looks a little cleaner this way. So I'm just kind of showing you that I do want to make sure that I'm going right over that first chain stitch so that it's nice and continuous. I'm going to do that all the way around, and then once I get back to the beginning of my chain stitch here in the center, I'm going to show you this technique where I take the eye of the needle and I'm going to place it inside the stitching of the first chain stitch. I'm going to pull that all the way through and then I'm going to take my needle and stitch it down in the last chain stitch. This is essentially a reverse chain stitch or a continuous chain stitch circle. That way you can't see where your stitching started or ended. I think this looks really cute and clean for the bow. And then once you turn it around on the back, your yarn should be close together, but if it's not, just weave it until they meet. But mine are close enough here, so I'm just going to tie off with a triple knot. And there you have it, a cute little bow for your little unicorn. This mane is the only other piece of chain stitching I think you may have some questions on, so let's go over it. I have about 3 feet of yarn here on my needle, and I'm going to do 4 different pieces of yarn for this mane, so you could do 4 different colors for this mane. But I'm just going to take it up on this top section of mane and I'm going to chain stitch it down all the way until I get to the tip. But you're going to have some issues when you cross over that original chain stitching from the horn. So when you get there, I like to do this technique where I take my chain stitch and I'm going to go down through the first chain stitch and then I'm going to come up in the middle of that white chain stitch. That way it's not kind of going through yarn, because if you go through yarn, it's really difficult to pull it through. So I just like to aim for the middle where no yarn is. And then again here, when I'm going down, I'm trying to aim for a position where there's no yarn underneath my needle, just so I'm not trying to pull that needle through all these different layers. Because as you saw there, it's already difficult enough to pull through without having to go through yarn. Continue this process until you get to the tip of the mane. And then once you get down there, you can kind of just stitch this off like you did all the other pieces. Like I said before, I am going to use 4 pieces of yarn to do this mane, so you're going to have 4 pieces of yarn at the top and 4 pieces of yarn at the bottom to tie off with. So let's flip this over once we've finished. You'll notice here, again, I have those 4 pieces of yarn I'm dealing with, so I'm just going to tie both of these off in triple knots. If any of your pieces of yarn are coming up along the same hole, you will want to kind of maneuver them so that you weave it under a different stitch. Otherwise, you do risk that entire knot pulling through to the front. And there you have it, a cute little mane for your little unicorn. How sweet is that? Now we can move on to our floral crown, and I have about 6 feet of yarn here on my needle. I'm going to start with this lazy daisy off to the left, and I'm going to take my needle up through the center of our flower, pulling that all the way through, making sure to leave about 4 inches on the back that we will do a knot with later. I'm going to take my needle down through the center, and then I'm going to come up along one of these dots on the first petal. Pull that through, making sure you create this nice little loop, and then we're going to stitch that down in the same hole we just created. Again, pull that down nice and taut. If you want, you can stop here and just do all 5 petals in this way, but I'm going to show you how to double up your flower just to create a fluffier effect. So again, I'm going to take my needle up through that same exact hole in the center, and I'm kind of going to loop my yarn around. So again, down through the center, and I'm going to come up just outside that first petal. That way when I pull it through, the yarn on the outside kind of envelops that first lazy daisy stitch. Again, stitch that down into the same hole you just created and pull that through. You'll either complete this process all the way around until all 5 petals are done, or do it with a single stitch, tie it off with a triple knot, and there you have it. To dot the center of this flower, I'm going to show you how to do it with a purl. So in this case, I'm going to use my same needle, but I'm going to thread it with DMC Floss here. I have about 2 feet of floss here just to do all 3 of my flowers at the same time, and I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to pop it up right in the center of this stitch. Now there's a lot of yarn here, so this may be hard to pull through, but just be a little diligent and kind of wiggle it around to get it through. Once through, I'm going to pop my purl on it, and I'm going to slide that all the way down, and then I'm just going to pop my needle back down into the center of the flower. I kind of like to go a little off towards the side so I'm not down in the same hole. I just brought my DMC floss up through. You may notice that the holes of the purl are kind of showing at the top, so I just like to kind of pull these until I get it so it's nice and flat and none of the holes of the bead are showing. Once I'm happy with the placement, I can just triple knot my DMC floss on the back. Sometimes I get a little crazy and do 4 or 5 knots here just to make sure it's really secure. And then again, just snip off that excess. But there you go. That's how you would dot this with a purl center. If you would prefer to dot your flower with yarn, you can do the same technique here. I have about 2 feet of yarn on my needle here, and I'm just going to pull it up through the center of my flower. Pull this all the way through, again leaving a tail to tie off with later. Now you can either do a French knot here, but I'm going to show you a modified simple knot that I like to do. And in this case, I'm literally just doing a double knot on top of each other. So I'm pulling through 2 knots, and when I pull through that second one, I want to make sure it's right on top of that first knot. So I kind of create a little ball in my yarn. You can do as many of these as you want. I find 2 looks really well for these flowers, but if you're doing something smaller or larger, 1 to 3 knots would work as well. When I push my needle down, again, I want to make sure that I'm not going down through the same hole that I just came up from. Otherwise, you risk kind of pulling that knot through to the back, and that won't look cute. Then I like to kind of finagle my 2 pieces of yarn on the back until there's no tails hanging up and it looks like a nice little flower center. And once I'm happy with that, I can turn my garment around and tie it off with a triple knot. Again, I'm doing this technique here where I go right over left, pulling that through, and then left over right. This is just a little sturdier than your typical triple knot. And fortunately here I did a quadruple knot just because I like to be really safe, but any of these will hold up well. But there you have it. Next, we're going to learn how to do a woven wheel or a rose stitch, and I really love how these turn out. So we're going to start with about 2 to 3 feet of yarn on our needle, and we're going to pull that up through the back of the sweater on one of the outside pegs of our woven wheel. Pull that all the way through, making sure to leave about 6 inches of tail to tie off with later. Now we're going to do all 5 of these spokes from the outside going in towards the center, just so that we have kind of a little ship wheel, if you will, of yarn. So again, I'm going to push this up through one of those spokes on the outline of our circle, and I'm going to push it down into the center of my circle. You can complete this process in kind of one step by going down through the center and coming up through the outside of one of the spokes, just to save a little bit of time, but if you find it's hard to pull through, feel free to just do one of these steps at a time. And then again, going down through the center. I'm going to speed up this process because it is a little boring to watch, but I do want you to see kind of how to do all 5 of these steps. So again, out through the center and then going down through that center until you complete all 5 of your spokes of the rose. Once you've finished with all 5 of your spokes, you're going to take your needle and you're going to poke it back through to the front in any of those blank spaces. Try to aim away from the yarn here. We're going to pull that through, and then we're going to start our weaving process. So we're going to go over, under, all these little pieces to create a nice little wheel effect. So I'm going to go under this first piece of yarn, and I'm going to pull that all the way through. Next, I'm going to go over that second spoke and then under the next one. So on each wheel turn, you'll go over, under, over, under. That way, when I come back to this first little piece, I went over on the first time, so I'm going to go under this time. If you notice it's kind of hard to poke the needle through, I find using the eye of the needle is a little gentler. That way I'm not getting snagged on any of the sulky or any of the yarn. So again, I'm just going to pull that through. And since I'm doing the second loop here, I'm just going to do the opposite process. So I'm going under this time, whereas the first time I went over, and I'm just going to keep going round and round until I'm happy with how fluffy that rose looks. Or it's impossible to get the needle through, because you will get to that point as well. Once I'm satisfied with it, I'm going to poke my needle down through the center. I kind of like to aim towards the inside of the rose just to hide that piece of yarn. And then I'm just going to pull that all the way through. You may notice that you kind of have to finagle this little piece to make sure it's on the bottom of your rose and you're not kind of cutting into the middle, just to make sure it looks really clean and cute like this little rose here. Tie that off with a triple knot and there you have it. The last step in our floral crown is adding greenery. Now, I don't have these marked off on this template here, but yours should have it marked off. You can either follow the template or kind of just do a free-for-all here and just add as much or as less greenery as you want. I think it even looks cute here without the greenery. But in this case, we're just going to be doing those same stitches that we did on our daisies, but in this case, we're just going to do one-off stitches for leaves, or 1 or 2 stitches for leaves. So you see me here doing kind of that one-off lazy daisy stitch, and I'm just going to show you up close this second version of this. So I'm just going to come up through that same hole I did for the first leaf. I'm going to pull this all the way through, and then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go down through that same hole, and then I'm going to come up maybe about a 1/2 inch away. On the template, you will have the little dots to show you where to end your leaves, but in this case, I'm just kind of free-for-alling it. If you want to point your leaf, you can actually come outside the little dot I have on the template just to make it a little sharper. So I'm just showing you here kind of a rounded leaf and a sharper leaf. Tie off each leaf or each section of leaves with a triple knot. For these little vine pieces, we are going to do a back stitch, so I'm going to come up through the back of the sweater and then go down a little bit off of the flower. You will be able to follow the line of the template. So again, coming up through the back, then I'm going to go down through the same hole from my previous stitch and pull that through. So again, coming up through the back of the sweater and then going down through that last stitch of the previous one. Then you can just add leaves everywhere you see it on the template or kind of free-for-all it. I like to add one to every single node that you see here. I just find that looks the cutest, but again, this is art. It's not supposed to be perfect, so just play around with it and see what works best for you. Again, these will be listed on the template where you could follow them and add a leaf to each little vinery, but you don't have to follow these at all. You can kind of do a free-for-all format. I'm just finishing up this little 5-leaf vine here on the sides, and then I'm going to flip this over and tie this off with a triple knot. You may notice that your yarn is not exactly close to each other, so in this case I'm just going to take my needle and I'm going to weave it under all these little pieces of yarn until I get back to that original piece of yarn. That way I can tie it off and I won't have any loops on the back of my fabric. I did have too much excess, so I just cut some of it off and then tied my triple knot, and there you have it. The last little thing we're going to learn is how to stitch the eyes, and this is going to be doing the same chain stitch technique we've been doing this entire time. I like to start on the tear duct side of the eye just so it makes the eyelashes a little bit easier to do on the end, but feel free to omit the eyelashes if you don't like them at all. Again, I'm just going to do that same chain stitching technique all the way along the eye until I get to the end where the eyelashes start. Once I get to the end, I am going to stitch that down on the first little piece of my eye, and then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to come up along one of these pieces of eyelash or lines for the eyelashes. So I'm going to start on the outside one first, and I'm just going to take it up through the top, and then I'm going to pull that all the way through. We're just doing a simple straight stitch here, so I'm just going to take it and I'm going to go down on the inside of the chain stitch and then come up along the second eyelash just to save some time. So I'm going to pull that through. Again, I like to make sure these are nice and taut, but don't pull too tight. And then again, just stitch that second eyelash down into your chain stitch to create those 2 cute little fluttery eyelashes. Feel free to add more or omit these altogether if you don't like them. Again, this is art. It's supposed to be fun, so have fun with it. On the back of the sweater, I am just going to, again, navigate that yarn back to the original piece of yarn by weaving it into the back stitches, just so that I don't have any loops on the back of my garment. And once I get back to the original piece of yarn, I can tie it off with a triple knot and cut off any excess. Once you're finished with your embroidery, you can actually remove this sticker with water. So you'll see me in the sink here, just kind of soaking the garment and scrubbing off all of that sulky stick and stitch. This does work. It does take a very long time though. So I found 10 minutes of like scrubbing and washing my sweater in the sink was enough to do it. But sometimes it does get a little crunchy if you don't wash it off completely. My preferred method is actually to throw these in the washer on a cold, delicate cycle. But if you don't have that, a sink works plenty well. Just make sure you wash it really, really well. If you notice any black specks or any crunchy bits, that is just the sulky left over, so you will have to go back and scrub that again. Once your garment comes out of the washer, you can place it on a flat surface to dry. I like to make sure these don't go through the dryer because that can end up making your yarn a bit fuzzy. But if it does, a lint shaver actually works really well. But there you have it. I absolutely love this pattern. I had so much fun creating it, and I have so many more ideas for future additions to these little unicorns, so stay tuned on my Instagram. I hope you had so much fun embroidering today with me. If you have any